Next, we are pleased to welcome the Deputy Secretary of the United States Department of Agriculture, Steve Censky, as our next speaker. Deputy Secretary Censky was sworn in as the Deputy Secretary of the USDA on October 11, 2017, after being unanimously confirmed by the Senate. He had previously served as the CEO of the American Soybean Association and as administrator of the Foreign Agricultural Service at the USDA. Censky grew up on a soybean, corn, and diversified livestock farm near Jackson, Minnesota. He obtained his Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from South Dakota State University and received his postgraduate diploma in Agriculture Science from the University of Melbourne, Australia. Without further ado, please help me welcome Deputy Secretary Censky to the podium.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, and it's great to be back here in South Dakota again. Great to be here with you. Thanks so much to Governor Noem. Thank you, Secretary Vanneman, for this invitation to join you here today. Really is my pleasure to be back here in South Dakota and to visit with you all. I want to introduce, before I go any further though, a couple of my colleagues from USDA that are here with me that are important here in South Dakota that help administer a lot of our programs. Julie Gross. Julie is the Executive Director, stand up Julie, of Rural Development here in South Dakota. And Paul Schubeck. Paul is our State Executive Director for our Farm Service Agency here as well. So thank you. Great to have them. It's, as was said, I grew up just down the road a bit in Jackson, Minnesota. Of course, when I grew up, and I heard someone say Yuksemash earlier there, you know, we're all products of immigrants that came here. And when I was growing up, it was common for grandparents to be coming over from the old country. So you would have farmers, you know, if they were of German descent, you would have people, maybe grandparents that were coming over from Germany. Or if they were from Sweden, they would have folks coming over from Sweden, etc. So it was for Ole and Lena as well. Lena's mother, Yuri, would come and stay with Ole and Lena many times for 6 months, 8 months at a time. It was very common then. Well, one day, as the neighbor Sven was driving down the road, he noticed that there was a big crowd gathered outside of Ole's barn. So he pulled up into the lane, got out of his pickup truck and said, "What's going on here?" And Lars, another neighbor, said, "Oh, it's pretty bad, Sven. Ole's mother, Yuri, was out picking eggs. She came through the barn. She got kicked in the head by Ole's old mule, and she's died." And Sven looked around at the crowd there and said, "Wow, she must have made a lot of friends during her time that she was staying here then with them." And Lars said, "You'd think so, but no, it isn't so. All these guys have mother-in-laws that are staying with them too, and they're trying to buy Ole's mule." So I know that here today, it's my pleasure to visit with you on kind of an update from DC as it is in the program. Want to talk some on trade, want to talk on the Farm Bill, on renewable fuels, innovation, and disaster assistance. First of all, on trade. Of course, as you know, there's a lot going on trade, and there's some real opportunities, I think, that are coming forward here in the coming months. One of them that we need continued help from you all and from across the nation is the U.S.-Mexico-Canada agreement, the updated NAFTA agreement. It's a great agreement. We need the stability. It locks in, of course, the tariff-free access that we had to the Mexico market. It makes improvements and we crack open additional market access into Canada, and it really is a great agreement. It is so important for virtually all of the commodities that you all here in South Dakota produce. Mexico is a top market for corn, for pork, for beef, for soybeans, you name it, and beef as well, and as well as dairy. And of course, we need that stability. We need to lock in that market access, and we also importantly make some good improvements. Canada has agreed to eliminate their discriminatory Class 7 pricing policy, which has really hurt our dairy industry and our dairy exports into the world market. We have greater market access. We have greater market access on poultry and eggs as well. Canada has agreed under that agreement to make reforms to their wheat grading system, where in the past, for U.S. wheat going into Canada, it was automatically downgraded to feed grade wheat. And now it will be able to be entered into Canada and sell at the grade that it is. And so there's some real improvements there. It's really going to be important that we get this agreement passed by the Congress over the next month or two, because that's really, because if we delay past that, I think it gets a lot harder to pass any kind of trade agreement. We enter even more into the political season, into the presidential season, and I think it's really going to be harder for Congress to do that. So we need to keep the pressure on Congress to pass that. I think you here in South Dakota, you're in good shape with Senators Thune and Rounds, as well as the Congressman Dusty. He's doing a great job, and he supports the USMCA, but I think if you working with your other colleagues of your national organizations as well, if you're involved in the farm groups, to really keep that pressure on the other states, I think it's going to be important for us to try to move that forward. Another area that I'm actually optimistic that we'll be able to get some great market access is in Japan. We have kicked off, as you know, free trade agreements with Japan. Japan was always the crown jewel of the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations. As we looked at the TPP, where were most of the benefits for U.S. agriculture going to come from? It was going to come from greater market access into Japan. I'm very hopeful that we are going to be able to have an early harvest. We are going to be able to get an agreement with Japan to provide market access for agriculture products early, sometime late this summer, early this fall. And that will be good because we want at least as good of access as Japan is giving to others in the TPP or under their Japan-EU free trade agreement, and we think that that will be very positive. It's going to be positive for, again, the host of commodities that are produced here in South Dakota, including pork, wheat, and dairy, and other commodities. And so, again, that's, I think, going to be good news. Of course, also want to talk a little bit on China. China, of course, is where the markets have been roiled, particularly from the industry that I came from previously, is in the soybean industry, being the top market. And I think everyone knows a bit of the history there, that China, while they had been a very good much for a lot of other products that we produce as well, that they had discriminatory practices where they had slow or non-existent biotech approval processes that have disrupted trade and denied technology. They have closed their market to poultry exports. They had closed their market for beef and pork that were impacted by the slow approval of animal veterinary drugs. They were not living up to the commitments that they had agreed to when they joined the World Trade Organization on corn or on wheat or rice. And so there was just a whole lot of issues there on the market access side that the president wanted to address. But importantly, he also wanted to address and you've heard a lot about this, the intellectual property concerns. The theft of intellectual property, the forced licensing. If companies wanted to do business in China, that companies had to take on a Chinese partner that would then quickly steal their technology, begin manufacturing there. And the president said that no more of this, and that's where we have entered into the trade dispute here over the last year. I actually was very hopeful that we were getting very close back in May to resolving that. China had made a number of commitments, not only to address the agriculture portion of that, but also on the intellectual property side of things as well. Unfortunately, they backed away. I think they were getting some pressure from some of the hardliners within China. And so we didn't have an agreement then. I think the good news is that after just a few weeks ago when the G20 summit in Osaka, Japan, President Trump and President Xi met, there was agreement there that they would continue talks, and some talks have taken place just this week by telephone in between U.S. And Chinese negotiators. We're hopeful, we're pushing, and the president carried with this when he went to Osaka, that China should be making as good faith. They should be resuming their purchases of agriculture products, not just soybeans, but across the board, a host of products: wheat, corn, rice, beef, dairy products, fruits and vegetables, nuts. All of those products, China should be resuming that, and so we'll be continuing to work on that over the coming weeks and pressing China that they need to be doing that even while the other larger negotiations continue on. Of course, you know that as the president has recognized that farmers have been on the tip of the retaliation spear, and so that's when we had the trade assistance package a year ago of about $12 billion. And then after the China backed away back in May, and we knew that the tariffs were going to be continuing, he called up Secretary of Agriculture Sonny Perdue and directed to say, we need to support the farmers. And that's where we put together a $16 billion assistance package to try to be of assistance. We know that that kind of assistance is not a replacement for markets. We know that farmers want to have their incomes from the marketplace and not from a government check. But we also know that while we work to try to achieve that market access and get China to play by the rules, we want to try to make sure we can try to assist farmers and help them stay in business. So we, as you know, we've announced a $16 billion program. $14.5 billion of that in market facilitation payments. Because we announced it during planting time, we didn't want to have planting distortions, and so we announced that we're going to have, of course, county rates. Those county rates are going to be available to producers in a county, no matter which of the list of commodities that they produce. We very much heard the complaints last year about the differences in commodities. It means that there is going to be differences, though, between counties. It's not going to be a uniform county rate that is paid. It is based on the estimated damages that from the various commodities and what those historical levels of exports to China were, how much historically of those commodities are produced in the county, and that's where you get your damage figure. And so there are going to be differences between those county rates. We'll probably be announcing those rates. I know that's one of the questions everyone's asking here in the next few weeks. So we're still working on that and still having some discussions with the Office of Management and Budget on that as well. But that will be announced soon. In addition to the market facilitation payments, we announced about $1.4 billion in additional food purchases We had over $1 billion last year as well. These are primarily not your row crops, but it did include pork and dairy. We have beef we're purchasing again this year. We'll be purchasing this year along with your pulse crops, fruits and vegetables and nuts that we'll be purchasing. Be distributing those through the school lunch program, through some of our food distribution programs, through food banks, so that that bounty of American farmers can go to people who need it. We also announced as part of that as well $100 million to be going on market development. That adds on to the $200 million that was announced last year to expand markets, primarily beyond China, so that those work can be done by those market development organizations that are doing that on behalf of farmers and ranchers, whether it be the U.S. Meat Export Federation, the Grains Council, the Dairy Export Group, the American Soybean Association, and the U.S. Soybean Export Council, and others to be doing that work. Want to mention a few things too on renewable fuels. I know how important that is here in South Dakota. Renewable fuels, in our view, are just really a win-win-win scenario. We are able, through renewable fuels, as you know well, we're able to utilize the bounty that we produce from our farmers. We're able to reduce our dependence on foreign oil. We're able to have a positive environmental impact, and we're able to provide employment growth and jobs and rural development. And so we are strong supporters at USDA of renewable fuels and have been continuing to push on that about the many benefits that they have to offer. As you know, President Trump and Secretary Perdue were in Iowa just a couple weeks ago, where the president had announced the year-round sales of E15 finally, after years of the industry pushing for that. Year-round sales of E15 are authorized, and so that's very good news. But we also know, and this is the discussions that we're currently having within the administration and taking up to the president, we know that the benefits of renewable fuels and that E15 and the renewable volume obligations that happen every year, those can be undermined by the small refinery exemptions that are given out by the EPA to small refineries that show economic hardship. That's a discussion that we're continuing to have. We're continuing to push that there should be, obviously, for those deserving refineries, there can be exemptions, but they should not be given out willy-nilly, and it should only be those that truly are suffering economic hardship. Also on renewable fuels, we know that globally how important that is, exports are, and we've really been working across the board to try to increase our exports. Of course, as part of the commodities that we want China to purchase, it does include products like ethanol and DDGs, in addition to the host of other commodities. And so we want to resume those sales there. But we're also USDA has been proactively working with the industry to create new markets as well. Been working in Mexico, and Mexico offers a great opportunity to expand sales of ethanol if they move to an E10, and that will be good news for our producers. Also working to resolve market access issues that we have in Brazil, Colombia, Peru, and other markets to try to make sure that we can keep those markets open. Farm Bill. Farm Bill, of course, was Congress took about 2 years to work and write a Farm Bill, and I can tell you that we at USDA are working just as quickly as we can to implement that bill, because we know how important that is to producers. It's important not only to have the safety net programs that are there, the ARC and the PLC programs. Sign up for that's going to begin in September. Dairy margin coverage program has already been announced. We are rolling out a lot of our conservation programs and conservation assistance, our grants that are available under our different titles of the Farm Bill. And so we've been very aggressive in moving those forward because we know how important that is. Again, one of our priorities because of the state of the dairy industry was announcing the dairy margin coverage program, and that was announced in June, and the sign-up is underway right now. We've also announced, of course, a number of other continuous sign-up for the CRP. We'll have a general sign-up later this fall, and that will take place as well. But things are moving along on the Farm Bill. Disaster assistance. I know that it has been a tough year here in South Dakota and across the Midwest, and that a lot of you as producers have really struggled to get your crop in the ground, or you haven't gotten your crop in the ground. And that's one of the things that we're pleased that Congress, in the disaster bill that they passed a few weeks ago, they did include prevented plant acres as an eligible disaster. And they provided about $3 billion in funding to take care of the producers that in the southeast that were affected by the hurricanes last year, the wildfires, as well as they did include the bin damage that took place from some of the flooding in Nebraska and Iowa early this spring, and other areas too. I know that there were probably a few areas maybe here in South Dakota as well. But also prevented plant. We're in the process now of putting together the rules and the regulations for that program. I will tell you that we're looking at seeing how we can top off the prevented plant payments that go to producers. Thankfully, a lot of producers I know have prevented plant under their crop insurance. That's a good thing, but we also know that that does not provide near the revenue like having a crop would provide as well. And so we are looking at how we can up the coverage level there through using those additional funds that Congress provided. We're still, I think, want to see what those number of prevent plant acres are in order to calculate how we stay within the money that Congress has given us. And so with the acreage reporting coming up here, we'll be able to have a better handle on how many prevent acres there are and be able to determine of whether, is it a 3% top up, a 5% top up, 7, 10, we don't know, and we'll have a better handle on that once we have those number of acres that have been announced. Finally, and want to be able to open it up for any kind of questions as well. But on disaster, I should also mention one of the things that we heard from, and I'm pleased that we were able to do that. We heard from a lot of producers, of course, that were experiencing prevented plant. We heard from my longtime friend and former colleague when I worked for Senator Jim Abner from South Dakota, and now U.S. Senator John Thune. He had me up in his office, and we talked with he and his longtime ag, L.A. Lynn, talking about the situation here, and really urged that we take a look at moving up that November 1st date on which those acres could be hayed or grazed under the prevented plant. And so, I'm pleased that within, a week of that, a few days, we did go ahead and we moved that up to September 1st. And so hopefully that will provide producers another opportunity to try to get some haying, some graze. We also opened that up so that silage, baleage, haylage is available as well to try to help assist producers because we know it's a really tough year. Finally, I want to talk about innovation. One of the things that we do at USDA and that is so important to the future of agriculture, as you all know, is innovation. And we are investing every day on how we can try to help producers be even more successful and help drive that innovation. Through our Agriculture Research Service, we are investing over $1.5 billion a year in cutting-edge research to try to help producers and ranchers. Through our National Institute for Food and Agriculture, again, about another $1.5 billion that we are funding through either competitive grant funding or formula funds that goes out to the states to support the ag experiment stations and the Cooperative Extension Service. We are also working through our programs in rural development that Julie is in charge of here in South Dakota, to see how can we make rural America a better place to live and work and thrive and help the business environment, and investing in water, sewer, broadband, hospitals, businesses, libraries, you name it. We're investing in those opportunities here. And then through other programs, whether it's through our Farm Service Agency, our Natural Resources Conservation Service, of how do we partner and help farmers be more sustainable and be more successful so that they can be successful not only this year, but for generations to come and for their children and for their grandchildren. I know that's one of the things every day that when I wake up and go to work, being a farm boy from Minnesota and spending my career in agriculture, the same thing for Sonny Perdue. Given his, both his growing up on a farm, training as a veterinarian, and then being involved in agribusiness all of his life, seeing what can we do to remove the obstacles, help make farmers, ranchers more successful, unleash the innovation that our agriculture industry and our businesses have. And that's very much where we want to hear from you. What more can we do while still being good stewards of taxpayer dollars? What more can we do to try to help you be successful? What do we need to change in order to help you be as competitive as you can in international markets and in domestic markets as well? We want to hear from you. We don't want to be like the guy who went to the doctor complaining about his wife that he thought that her hearing wasn't as good as what it used to be. He had a doctor's visit, and he mentioned that at the end of the visit, and the doctor said, well, I tell you what, when you go home this evening, I have a little test for you. When you go in, stand a ways behind your wife and say something, and then if she doesn't respond, keep on moving closer. And then next time you have your appointment, come back and tell me how close you were before she responded. So the guy thought he would do that. He went home that evening. His wife was at the stove cooking dinner, and he started out about 30 feet behind her, and he said, honey, what's for dinner? He didn't hear a response, so he moved up about 10 feet, and he said, honey, what's for dinner? Still didn't hear anything. Moved up till he was just 5 feet behind her, and he said, honey, what's for dinner? She turned around and looked at him, and she said, for the third time already, it's lasagna. So we don't want to be like that guy who cannot hear and that thinks the other person has the hearing problem. We want to hear from you and how we can be helpful. Thank you very much, and I'd be glad to take any questions. Any questions? Yes.
Deputy Censky, thanks for taking the time to talk to us. I had a conversation with a friend of mine talking about the MFP program and trade assistance package, and we were wondering, might a better use of those funds, rather than just direct-to-farmer checks, could we use those as an investment in technology? We know that we need to crush more beans in this country and sell more meal worldwide. Is there a way we can juice up the oilseed processing capacity in the country? Is that something USDA could help with?
Well, I do think, I mean, we've had a good investment from the private sector, as well as from farmer co-ops here. We got some folks that have been very instrumental on that. That's something that, you know, we do have our business and industry loan program that can try to help with that through rural development to take a look if there's the business case and the need. I know, you know, AGP is making a major expansion here in South Dakota with a crushing plant as well. At this point in time, I will tell you, for us to reverse course and tell the farmers, just kidding, you're not going to get the dollars, that's not going to happen. Other questions?
Yes, Mr. Undersecretary, thanks for coming today. Lynn Churchma was the man in Thune's office, right?
Yes,
So
Lynn,
we should send him a big thank you and a hug and all that, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, he's a good
I've
man.
known Lynn for a lot of years, and he does really good work.
He's a great man. Couple of things. One would be the prevent plant payments. Do you have any idea, you know, we were told like there's only $1.5 million in the kitty in South Dakota for that. How much more incentive there's going to be to plant those cover crops? Because many are deciding right now whether to plant cover crops or wait to put wheat in or alfalfa or exactly what to do. Do you have any plan on that? And then the last thing is the trade payments. I don't know, I've been contacted by quite a few people, but not to allow payments to go out of country like to the Batista brothers in Brazil or Smithfield Foods in China or the Centera Farms in Canada, where these dollars go out of our country, not just out of state. If there's some way you could, you know, rather target those monies to not go out of country, since, you know, the trade issue needs to be addressed, but we need fairness on our end too. Thank you.
Sure. No, thanks. Good questions. I can tell you in terms of like the market facilitation payment program, as you know, we announced that we would provide, in order to provide to receive an MFP payment, you have to plant a crop. We said there would be a minimal payment for if you're planting a cover crop on those acres. We haven't announced. That will be part of what we're going to be announcing here, you know, in the near future, what that minimal payment is, but it's not going to be nearly as large as, of course, what the other payments will be on a county-by-county basis, and so it will be somewhat minimal. We do have assistance available under the EQIP program that can help producers with the cost of putting in cover crops, and so you know, we'd be interested in working there, and that kind of assistance is there. So visit your local NRCS office on that. With regard to the issue that you mentioned, and particularly what has been in the news, you know, where under the food purchase and distribution program, where we're purchasing some commodities and donating them either to schools or to the food banks. For instance, JBS, the pork processor, has gotten some of those contracts. That's really been a tough issue because we want to be able to, obviously, what we're doing is we want to support the producer and the producer that is growing. And in some areas, in some draws, in some markets, you know, it could be that they are the major purchaser of hogs from producers in that area. And so we want to get the product off the market. Whatever we purchase is 100% U.S. pork. It is not foreign pork, it is U.S. pork. But that's been a tough issue because if we're going to try to remove pork from the market, and in certain draw areas, you know, that there are certain packers that serve those areas. So that's been a tough one to deal with.
Steve Simon, would USDA consider making the available for baleage and chopping and so forth to remain September 1? Has there been talk about that instead of going back to November 1, possibly next year?
Yeah, we're going to take a look at that, Steve. When we announced the change, we said this is for this year only right now, but that we were taking a look at it. You know, and we are going to take a close look at that. You know, of that. I mean, I think I understand that, particularly here in the more northern latitudes, November 1 is really late. Could be under snow cover by November 1. And there's not a lot of value for the haying or grazing at that point in time either, even if it isn't under snow. You know, I think we'll be taking a look at that. I think one of the things of looking at changing it, just to have a uniform date like we have this year, September 1, or do we have a date that is staggered as you go from north to south? We'll be taking a look at that. Other questions?
Good to see you again, Steve. The question I have is the sign up for the farm program. Will we be signing up for 2 years when it opens up this fall? Is the question I have.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. I'm going to look to. It is a 2-year sign up. Or it's an election that you make for the first 2 years of whether you are choosing ARC or PLC. And so that does apply for those 2 years, and then thereafter it becomes an annual election that you'll be able to do crop by crop and farm by farm. But for the first sign up, according to the provisions in the Farm Bill passed by Congress, it is a 2-year commitment that you make.
Steve, I got one more question. If there's going to be a minimal payment, presumably for MFP on cover crops, we're doing acreage reports right now, and a lot of cover crops aren't planted. So are you going to have FSA have another sign-up round to report to FSA that we got cover crops planted and that it'll be subject to the MFP payment?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think everyone was hoping by July 15th everything would be in and done, as I know all of you were as well. And I don't know the answer to that, Steve. You know, I think that was initially was thinking that we would know that by July 15th, but with the continued rains and wet weather, I think I don't know the answer to that. I'll take that one back. Yeah. Why don't you grab a microphone there, Paul?
South Dakota, is it on? Okay. South Dakota has chosen to use July 15th as the final date for reporting acreage, but we're taking registers in the offices. So if you call in and report your that you're done planting, we'll put you on a register and we will sign up later. Now, there are some states that there was an opportunity that just came today for them to have a later sign up. And the problem there is that we've had an extension with the prevented plant acres to extend to July 15th. And so then if we were to do an extension on signing up acres after that, would the prevented plant acres also be extended? And we don't have an answer to that. So we chose to keep the acreage sign up at July 15th, take a register for people. And the question about cover crops, you can always amend your acreage report when you finally get the prevented planted acres. I don't think so. I need to check on that. He says with a penalty, I don't think so, but I'm not sure about that. So anyway, thank you.
I think the bottom line is, Steve, we'll take that back. I think we want to be flexible because we recognize that it's a really tough year. And so we don't want to, you know, if a producer reports and then later does an amendment because they planted a cover crop on those acres, we don't want to be in a position that we're penalizing that. Again, the whole point of this is to try to be flexible and try to help producers.
Hi, Steve. Thanks for coming. A week ago Friday, we had a USDA report that came out, and acreage from corn went from 85 to 91, and we lost 38 cents in about 15 minutes. Then the next day it comes out that they didn't have information from 14 states, and they still use intended planting. That's pretty tough. We haven't seen anything like that come out of that office for a while like that. So if you could comment on that, because that had a really large impact on a lot of people. And so kind of a tough question, but if you would address it, please.
Yeah, I mean, and we've certainly heard a lot, Paul, as you can imagine, on that. And we've talked to our National Agriculture Statistics Service folks on this. I mean, every year they come out with that acreage report, and that's the time of the year that they do that, the market and the trade, everyone's expecting that. And so they did their survey, it was in early June there, and the acres, you know, were done, reported by the farmers based on what how the farmers responded to either written surveys, telephone surveys, or in-person surveys at that time. Now, granted, some of those were in early June, and it just kept on raining. And so I think that's why you have, you know, a lot of folks that say, well, this isn't accurate. That's why they're resurveying, which they've done in the past. But I think this, you know, I think what we saw was the difference being, you know, we've had other wet years, but this year seems like an historically wet one.
I guess maybe learning from that, maybe just not do the report and say until we get further information. I don't know. I understand what you're saying that they're wanting that, but I think it would be better off not to do the report at all. See, it kind of had some stuff that would have.
Yeah, and you know, tomorrow another from USDA, another world area supply and demand estimates is coming out. And in the earlier last month's WASDE, the analysts did make some adjustments, thinking, you know, they not only looked at the planting intentions, but they also looked at the crop progress, weekly crop progress reports, and other information. And the question, I think, will be, are the analysts going to be, you know, looking at the NASS survey data, or are they going to be tempering that some? So tomorrow will be another report. Great. Well, thank you again. Again, it was great to be here with you. Thanks for what you do, and it's great to be back here in South Dakota. Thanks a lot. Thank you.
I think the Lieutenant Governor and the Secretary of Inland would like to get a picture with you. Thank you so much, Deputy Secretary, again. Well, that concludes today's panels and speakers. So we invite you all to head over to the reception in Exhibit Hall 2, and then we'll see you tomorrow. Thank you.